welcome to Cover Story. Today we are in conversation with Manish Tiwari, former INB Union Minister and also the Congress Lok Sabha MP from Anandpur Sahib in Punjab. Welcome to this conversation, Manish. It's been a while since you and I had one of our conversations. But
Thank you very much, Priya. It's always a pleasure talking to you. You know, one of the few sane voices and sane programs left in the Star of Babel that we call television.
Well, I will not argue with that, but I will just no comments. But apart from that, Manish, today's we've been today the controversy of the day is really this renaming of the Nehru Museum Library by the BJP government as the Pradhan Mantri Memorial Museum and Library. Now, I notice you've also been tweeting against this move, saying legacies are not built by erasing other names, etc. So, your first thoughts on this?
Well, Priya, it's imbecile, puerile, and childish, for the lack of a better word. The fact is that if you look around the world and the Prime Minister is headed for Washington, D.C., every president of the United States of America has his own library where the presidential papers and other memorabilia are really put up, stored, exhibited. So therefore, it is not as if successive US presidents, sought to erase the memory of George Washington, who was the first president of the United States of America, and say that everything that succeeding presidents have done needs to be stuffed into George Washington's library or museum. That is absolutely a very imbecile or a kiddish way of going about it. The Nehru Memorial Museum and Library has been in place since the death of India's first Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Subsequently, Mr. Lal Bahadur Shastri became the Prime Minister of India. You have the Lal Bahadur Shastri Memorial. Then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated in the October of 1984. You have the Indira Gandhi Memorial Museum and Trust at number 1 Safdarjung Road and 1 Akbar Road. Then subsequently, Shri Rajiv Gandhi became Prime Minister. After that, P.V. Narasimha Rao Sahab became Prime Minister. Mr. Devagowda became Prime Minister. Mr. Indra Kumar Gujral became Prime Minister. Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, Dr. Manmohan Singh, Shri Narendra Modi. So therefore, you can actually have a very rich pantheon of libraries and museums, even funded out of the union budget. Not all of them essentially in Delhi. They could be located wherever the family members of these deceased leaders wants them to be located. And their papers, their memorabilia, memories associated with them, collected over 5 or 6 decades that each of them would have spent in public life. They could all be kept in a very, very proper manner. I remember former Prime Minister, Mr. Chandrasekhar, used to spend a lot of time in Bhonsi. He had set up an ashram after his Bharat Yatra. And I recently read, I think about 3 or 4 months back, that particular place where he was very passionate about and he nurtured it with a lot of care and affection has really been languishing. It's in a dilapidated condition altogether. So rather than try and stuff everything into Tinmurti Bhavan, which essentially what this government has tried to do, and sort of obfuscate or erase the legacy of India's first Prime Minister, this would have been a much, much better way of doing it. Because essentially, Priya, this is an ideological battle. If you go back to the partition of India, out of the partition of India, 3 things emerged: an Islamic Pakistan and 2 competing visions of India. A vision which believed that India should be a pluralist, progressive, democratic, liberal nation, where everybody, irrespective of their religion, their caste, their creed, their place of birth, their status in society, would have equality of opportunity. And then there were people who believed that since India had a religious partition, it should have gone to a logical conclusion. Now, Prime Minister Nehru was the inheritor of the first vision after the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi, 5 months post the independence of India on 15th of August 1947. And therefore, he ideologically held the preponderance of the second vision at bay. The preponderance of the second vision actually got their moment in the sun in the May of 2014 when they formed the first majority government. So since then, there has been a consistent attempt to try and obfuscate, if not erase, that particular vision of India, which was then incorporated into the constitutional design. So it's a very, very clear ideological attempt to try and obscure the founding vision of India. So this is what changing the nomenclature of the Nehru Memorial Museum and Trust is all about.
On a lighter note, someone, Sandeep Ghosh on Twitter, who's a columnist, he's saying that NM will also stand for Narendra Modi. So he should have just kept the NMNL and, gone about the business. But haven't the Congress left a vacuum where the BJP's walked in? If you had done the Bonsai Museum, if you had done Narasimha Rao, if the Congress had done felicitated various other prime ministers, including Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who was more Nehruvian than, any other prime minister, then the BJP would not have seen this opening. The only museums you have are for Nehru and Indira Gandhi.
Well, there's nothing which stopped the fellow travelers of other former prime ministers from creating these spaces either in Delhi or around the country. And at some point in time, if there would have been need for an apportionment or an appropriation from the national budget, I'm sure it would have been forthcoming. Having said that, if you really look at parallels in the United States or the United Kingdom or other countries around the world, most of this work is done by private trusts, which these leaders or their ideological fellow travelers or admirers really set up. So all the presidential museums and libraries where the papers of former presidents and their memorabilia are stored are really in the nature of private and public trusts. So under those circumstances, there is nothing which stopped the admirers of, let's say, former Prime Minister Shri Chandrasekhar or other former prime ministers for really setting these institutions up. And to the credit of the Indian National Congress, I think setting up not only the Nehru Memorial Trust and Library, but some of the other museums associated with former prime ministers is actually been an attempt to preserve that legacy. And having said that, I think there was space to actually do much more rather than try and erase the one institution which has actually stood both the test of time, has been an intellectual home for a whole panoply of scholars, not only those who belong to the center or the left, but even to the right. And now you have this strange situation whereby you are on a, as I said, an imbecile, puerile renaming spree.
Manish, have you been to the Pradhan Mantri Sangrahalaya, the museum that they have created for prime ministers, where each prime minister has got a corner, maybe not as big a whole museum to themselves, but there is a corner where, he's at least, this is something which was not done early on. Nehru Memorial was only about Panditji. Now at least it's gone for other prime ministers also. They also, as you said, deserve their place. So in that sense, what the Modi government says, we are democratizing the prime ministership and, giving equal space to every prime minister. That will strike a chord with the masses.
So the question is, Priya, does a prime minister deserve a corner or does he deserve a museum to himself? The thing is, there is
something is better than nothing.
Not a question of something is better than nothing. I mean, some of these gentlemen have served this nation very illustriously. Mr. Vajpayee was prime minister for 10 years. Dr. Manmohan Singh was prime minister for 10 years. Before that, other prime ministers have served equally illustriously. So rather than create a corner for them, you should have created an entire museum for them. For example, I think the government of Punjab still should create a museum for former Prime Minister Mr. Inder Kumar Gujral. He was a very illustrious son of Punjab. So therefore, there is something which should be done. Similarly, there's nothing which stops the government of Andhra Pradesh or the government of Telangana for creating a really a really state-of-the-art, beautifully curated museum for former Prime Minister Mr. P.V. Narasimha Rao, or from Gujarat for doing that for Prime Minister Morarji Desai. If I were to reverse that question and really ask what stopped Prime Minister Narendra Modi when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat for doing something in terms of a museum and library for Prime Minister Morarji Desai, then why didn't he do it? So therefore, if you get into this finger pointing, he said situation, then we can go on and on. But that's not the intent of this conversation. All I'm trying to say is you could have done many, many more rather than try and erase the one which exists. That's the short point.
Okay, well, that is an argument. I think that does have some merit because there is a consistency, replacing. But again, will they say we are only doing what we learned from the Congress? The Congress began the renaming spree, really, or the naming spree. There's so many, everything is either Rajiv Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, or Nehru. There is no fourth name really in the that has happened ever since the Congress governments have been in power.
Well, in the sense that, as I said, nothing stops you from naming anything after anybody else. There are a large number of roads in Delhi who are named after very, very illustrious freedom fighters and other people who've contributed to the public space. All of them essentially are not from the pantheon of the Congress. Similarly, across the country, as you travel, you find that a large number of people have been commemorated in many different ways. So, to say that, because the Congress did this, and so therefore, we are going to then indulge in some extremely imbecile kind of retribution is very childish for a government which claims to have now been in office for 9 years.
Okay, I want to share another anecdote with you before I move on to the next topic, which is the Uniform Civil Code. We were just talking about the NML, how it can stand for Narendra Modi and Nehru. I don't know if you remember, I wrote a book called The Contenders, where it featured some young leaders, and Akhilesh Yadav was one of them. And he told me how the Delhi-Lucknow Expressway has the toll booths which are shaped like A and Y, which I don't know whether you've noticed after his initials. And then he said, "Chalo, ab to ye Yogi Adityanath ke bhi kaam aa jayenge," because it's Y and A. So politics has a way, of putting things in their proper place.
Which is one thing which I've never understood. Leaders actually commemorating themselves while they are still alive. Commemoration.
Statues of Mayawati, for example.
I'm not naming anybody, but the fact remains that commemoration is something which should be left to people who really want to preserve and perpetuate that legacy, rather than try and create your own legacy during your lifetime.
History shall judge me more kindly. Those words are really coming true.
Well, history is judging him much more kindly. I remember
yes.
I had anchored that last press conference of his.
That's right. Yeah.
He turned out to be absolutely prophetically correct on that.
That I would agree with you on. Now, Manish, the Uniform Civil Code, it looks like the government is making a move to bring it back. That is also the only unfinished item on the BJP agenda, really. They've done Article 370, they've done Ram Janmabhoomi Temple. So now Uniform Civil Code seems to be coming. Again, you've been writing against it. You've been saying it's against our constitution, the spirit of the constitution. So could you care to elaborate on that point?
Well, first of all, Priya, I'm extremely disappointed with the Law Commission of India. How can you really recommend the continuance of the sedition, especially seeing the gross use and misuse of the sedition law? The Supreme Court won't have stepped in lightly and stayed all trials, advised all state governments and other instrumentalities not to register any FIRs under the sedition law if there wouldn't have been serious apprehensions about its misuse. So therefore, for the Law Commission to actually recommend that the sedition law be retained and not only retained, but the punishment be increased, I frankly, for the lack of a better word, undermines the credibility of the Law Commission as an institution per se. Number two, the same Law Commission has now come out saying that they would want to invite fresh thoughts with regard to the Uniform Civil
UCC.
Code, especially after the previous Law Commission had categorically said that there is no case for a Uniform Civil Code. And as someone who had written a piece on it after being invited to a discussion in Chennai in 2014, I had argued that even though the directive principles of state policy do talk about the desirability of a uniform civil code, but given the sheer diversity of India, and not only religious practices of different religions, but religious practices intersee between the faiths itself, how can you really have a uniform civil code? Because are you going to then start regulating the manner in which people conduct their personal lives? But if somebody actually wants to not follow those religious practices and follow a more secular marriage and inheritance code, you have the Special Marriages Act. For example, I was married under the Special Marriages Act, right? So therefore, yeah. So therefore, and that was by choice, and that option is always available. So the Special Marriage Act in itself is a self-contained uniform civil code.
I agree with you, Manish, but there are also, the argument that this is done because the matter of choice may not be left to the woman. In some cases, it's the parents and the husband who will exercise the choice for the woman. And a lot of personal laws are discriminatory, especially against women, even in cases where succession, inheritance, etc. are concerned, apart from divorce.
So reform those personal laws. I mean, after all, the Hindu laws were codified by the much reviled Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, which reviled by the right. Right, he is the person by the right. Yeah, I mean, so he's because he was really the bulwark against what their vision of what India should be and what his vision of India was, and he eventually succeeded in actualizing that vision. But be that as it may, we've gone into that. So Prime Minister Nehru actually reformed the Hindu personal laws, the laws of marriage, inheritance, and succession. Subsequently, when there was a UPA government, you actually made the inheritance laws, women friendly. So therefore, there's nothing really which stops you from, amending those personal laws. But that voice for reform has to come from within that faith. You see, if you try and impose reform from outside, that reform will never be accepted. For example, I agree with you that there are a number of religious practices in different religions, especially associated with marriage, inheritance, etc., which need to be reformed. But that voice has to come from within that community, and there have to be powerful advocates and proponents who need to have the conviction of courage to be able to withstand the pressure of conservative elements, within those respective faiths, who would want status quo to be perpetuated. So therefore, to make that or to extrapolate that and say that there is a case for a uniform civil code, I mean, forget everything else. Within the broad rubric of the Hindu faith, there are, a myriad different ways in which people actually worship their gods. They do get married. Within the Hindu faith, there are certain marriages which are void ab initio, but there are certain exceptions which have been built into keeping in view customary practices, what is called spinda relationships. So therefore, how are you going to really be reconciling, all conflicting customary practices which now have been holding the field for millennia. So you are really walking into a minefield. And I do not think that, one fine day you'll wake up in the morning and you'll say, hey, presto, we've kind of done away with everything which has been going on for millennia. And therefore, this is going to be the code which is going to govern the lives of 140 crore Indians. I think in the absence of a larger national consensus before going down that path, you are going to end up creating, for the lack of a better word, complete anarchy.
On that note, I'm going to take a short break, but I'm going to come back and I have a couple of more follow-up questions on the UCC with Manish Tiwari. So stay with us. Hello and welcome back to a cover story conversation with Manish Tiwari, former INB minister, and someone who's also very articulate in Parliament. I think we've been all following your speeches, Manish, and a lot of issues. I think your columns and what you say in Parliament is actually, in terms of being a thought leader, also you kind of set a whole narrative going.
Extremely kind, Priya. I don't know whether I deserve that kindness or not.
No. Which is why I enjoy our conversations with you, and we get a lot of good feedback also, I must tell you, Manish, on that. But coming back to the UCC, I don't know if you noticed something. I was, in fact, doing an article on it. When they revoked Article 370, it was 5th August 2019. When they did the Ram Janmabhoomi Pujan, it was also 5th August 2020. So what is so special about that date for the Modi government? And do you think the UCC will also happen on 5th August?
Well, essentially, you see, you decided to revoke Article 370 also for ideological reasons. Article 370 had been hollowed out by successive governments ever since Jammu and Kashmir adopted a separate constitution of its own on the 26th of January 1957. Now, that matter has been hanging fire in the Supreme Court. Since the August of 2019, it's been 4 years, and the court has still not adjudicated on the legality. Having said that, the government also not had the conviction of courage of holding an election in Jammu and Kashmir. If revoking Article 370 was such a popular move, if dismembering a state and converting it into 2 union territories was such an extremely popular move, then why is it that you've not had the courage for 4 years to hold an election and take it to the people and get it validated? So obviously there is great levels of insecurity. At the moment you hold elections, you may have a popular invalidation of what you've really done. So therefore, the Jammu and Kashmir story is not a closed chapter. Yes, the security situation has improved. There is no doubt about it. And it's good that it has happened, because ultimately a peaceful Jammu and Kashmir is in everybody's interest. But does that peace, quote unquote, really translate into an endorsement of what the government did on the 5th and 6th of August 2019? I am not so sure. And if the government is so sure, every political party in Jammu and Kashmir, national or regional, has been asking for elections, then why don't you hold elections in Jammu and Kashmir? So therefore,
waiting for that delimitation to happen, which may work in their favor.
Well, the delimitation is over. The delimitation has been done. So those constituencies, irrespective of whatever reservations who had, is now a done deal. So therefore, if you have a delimitation, which you think or others think will work in the favor of a particular political party, and even with that advantage, you're not holding elections, then obviously there is great levels of insecurity about what you have done, and notwithstanding the constitutionality of that, which is under challenge, and which, by the passage of time, is slowly and gradually being rendered redundant. So having said that, the Uniform Civil Code similarly, you see, if the objective is not to take the agenda of polarization further, and it is actually meant to be a reform measure, you first have to build a national consensus on it. Where are the conversations which have taken place? You have the Law Commission, which has again try to, resurrect a ghost which its predecessor had buried. But where is the attempt to really try and build a national consensus? And where is an approach paper even where people can have an idea as to what really is the thinking of the government when they talk about a uniform civil code? What exactly do they mean? What are the modalities? What are the contours? What is the fine print? What is the thinking? Eventually, what is the legal architecture that you have in mind? So you have a long road to traverse till the time, of course, you decide to, like the Jammu and Kashmir reorganization
Ordnance.
and the 370, bounce it on an unsuspecting parliament and then use a brute majority to get it through.
I was just going to say ordinances rather than approach papers seem to be the modus operandi of this government.
Which very unhealthy for a democracy, I must say.
But having said that, they did abolish the triple talaq pretty successfully, and that move has gone down well. So maybe that is also a step towards the UCC.
Well, is the UCC going to be one religion specific? When you talk of a uniform civil code, is it a one religion specific
target
or one religion targeted initiative that you have in mind? Because when you talk of a uniform
I walked into that one, didn't I?
Yeah, when you talk of a uniform civil code, for example, you have the Anand Marriage Act, under which the Sikhs get married. It was a long struggle to get the Anand Marriage Act enacted. Do you think anybody in the Sikh community is going to accept the abrogation of the Anand Marriage Act and its replacement by some kind of a secular confessional form of marriage being solemnized in a different manner? Or, for example, let's say very, very substantive sections of the Hindu faith, are they going to accept that the manner in which a marriage is solemnized would be some other way rather than taking those 7 feras around the sacred fire? Or for that matter, would the Christian community really would accept that marriages would be solemnized except in the church by following a particular religious practice as has been done for eons and eons? So therefore, that's what I'm saying. This is this seems to be more of a dog whistle, aimed at really othering the other rather than any substantive thought through move.
On that note, Manish, I just saw we're totally out of time, but thank you so much for this. And I do hope you get to make some of these statements in Parliament, and there is not just,
I hope Parliament functions. Because you have a very strange situation whereby you may have a new building, but you have a completely dysfunctional Parliament. I would have rather appreciated a functional Parliament, even if it was under a banyan tree.
On that note, thank you so much, Manish Tiwari, for this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.